Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a replay of the Badger Mushroom, or as it was otherwise known as the FV217 when, you know, they didn't fancy saying quite such a mouthful. No, I haven't gone completely insane. At least some of you will get that reference, and I think that's still a reasonably well-known thing, but yeah, it's quite an old reference at this point to that particular animation. Anyway, I couldn't help myself, honest. So this is MacShot. He is in, of course, the by now not that new, but still, you know, it's still quite new British Tier 10 tank destroyer, and he is here on Lakeville. And it's, I think, 357 matchmaking? Yeah, it is. So, not so nice for everything below him, but it's quite nice if you happen to be one of the top tiers. And he's got himself into a really powerful position. This thing is a hull-down monster. Now, the DPM is like the headline of this, and it is only slightly better DPM-wise than the Torty, but it does have that bit of extra DPM. Possibly the bigger bump that you get over the Torty is the max possible damage that you can do, because you have higher damage shells than the Torty, so it's something like 28,000 versus 20,000. So the damage potential of the machine jumps way up, even though the actual DPM's only gone up by like 8 or something like that. It's not a big jump in DPM, but it is still technically the biggest. But you've also got a lot of the other nice things about the Torty. You've got the 10 degrees of gun depression, you've got quite a... It's an okay amount of gun traverse. I mean, it's nothing like the AT-15 gets. That's by far the most comfortable of the British line, but it's still not terrible. The mobility is good, but the armour, and this position is like perfect for this level of armour. The frontal armour on this is very, very good indeed. And if you can use that gun depression, if you can be hull down and have things pinging at you just at your front armour, then you're almost immune to everything except like high caliber HE basically. And even there, with a little bit of angle, MacShot was able to just absorb that heat round from the M4A1, who wouldn't have had a hope in hell of penning with the standard AP that they carry, let alone the heat, as you saw there. So it's really a bit of a monster in that regard, but of course it's also a tank destroyer, and so if you can just get around the thing and not engage it frontally when it's holding a choke point, then it's all well and good. And in this particular, you know, circumstance, well, it's just you want to try and shoot it from the side if possible, but that's a bit easier said than done, because whichever way somebody attacks him from, well, I mean, they're going to have to attack him down the middle path and shoot at him from the town basically simultaneously, otherwise he can just turn his front armour, and that's that. So he's trying to support the town, but as we can see, quite a lot of the enemy team, including quite a lot of their heavy armoured stuff, have gone through the valley, which is never a good plan, but it's going to basically force his team to turn around and deal with it. Now, you'd think that would mean that his team in the town would have an easier time of it, but that's not going to be the case either, because the enemy Stridswagen 103 and I think the 907 were also putting in some quite effective side fire. So you would think that so many of the enemy tanks being in the valley would be a really good thing for their team, but as it turned out, no, not so much. It didn't really matter. So that's his first damage taken. Not quite sure where, possibly the lower plate. I mean, you know, on flat ground this thing is a bit easier to deal damage to, but if you can just hide the lower front plate and make sure that nothing can drive around you, and you're not having to face HE firing Type 5 heavies, for example, then it's all gravy. But this is quite a lot of enemy tanks, and he doesn't have that much backup. I mean, this pan is not looking too healthy, and the T28 Prot also not very healthy, and their armour's not going to stand up very well in this kind of fight. So they're pressing forwards. MacShot decides to pull back a bit so he can use this little bump in the ground here to hide his lower front plate, which is absolutely the right thing to do, especially as, hey look, there's a T95. So he's now relying on just the accuracy and the excellent handling of this gun. I think it's like the same, was it 1.7 seconds aim time, same as the Torty. So it does handle exceptionally well. It's very good for just point and shoot, especially at close range. You don't have to wait a long time for the reticle to settle down. He's also just firing through all his APCR rounds at this stage because his back is absolutely against the wall. He's got all of these tanks in front of him. And hey look, there's that Stridsvagn 103 coming up behind as well, which is not really ideal. This is looking a little bit hairy. And this is where that combination of decent alpha damage and a quick rate of fire is coming in very, very useful. So he eats a T95 shell in the tracks. Fortunately, that would have taken off most of his remaining health. However, the SD1 absolutely doing the right thing, going for the lower front plate there, so he's still losing some hit points. But this is where the DPM beats out the alpha of a machine like the T95. And now he's been able to reposition. Now the ST1 can't just safely get his lower front plate. Well, I mean, the ST1 should just be trying to get around him at this point, and instead he's playing the hull down game. And the ST1 is a very, very well armoured machine, but, you know, this thing does, even with the AP, have pretty damn decent pen. So, yeah, it's not really a fight that the ST1 wants to be in, and unfortunately for the ST1, it's a fight he's just lost. Now, there was a Stridsvagn behind him, but I think one of his allies took out the Stridsvagn. However, he's just lost his last ally, so having dealt with everything that came round from the valley, and look at that, that was a hell of a guesstimate. Wow, okay, well, there goes the 907. That was one of the more dangerous remaining enemy tanks. Good thing they were a one-shot, but even so. Anyway, so yeah, he now has to turn around and deal with everything that's coming from behind. And, I mean, I've showed similar replays to this before on this map. You know, this position is somewhat defensible, provided you don't just get pushed from both sides at once. And because he was dealing with basically everything coming from the valley side, and he had the bits of terrain there to use, he had the DPM, he had the penetration, he had the damage, he was able to survive. But he's not won it yet. But he's now got a better chance of doing this. His allies in the town, although they didn't fare that well, at least kept enough stuff off his back for long enough that he was able to deal with the valley side things. And now, although it's still 4 versus 1, it's all tank destroyers basically. And oh, hello, he gets a little bit of a, like, he just had an inkling that maybe someone was coming through the valley, and then he gets an inkling, oh, maybe they're coming up behind me, and that was a distraction. And those inklings were both correct. So he's taking out the Jagdpanther 2. The Scorpion is a one-shot. The Udez is coming up behind him, but he's actually got all these wrecks here now, so he's got just about enough time to get his machine turned around. And bounces a shell from the Udez, who cannot resist this gun. I think it's, what, 123mm, so it goes over that magic 120mm caliber needed to overmatch these machines. And although he's trying for the sneaky trick shot just underneath the gap of that destroyed Pan's turret, it doesn't quite work out, so he's going to have to go forwards, and bam. Well, okay, kill number 8. His back must be hurting pretty hard by this point. This is a bit ridiculous, but you know, if nothing else shows off the armor and the DPM of this machine, it's this replay right here. And there aren't many machines, there aren't many tank destroyers certainly where you could do this, but the enemy team absolutely helped him into this situation, and his own team was able to buy him enough time, so he only had to deal with things coming from one side, more or less. The only time that he seriously had to worry about getting flanked was with the Udez coming up behind him, but he was able to dispatch the enemies on the other side quickly enough that it didn't matter. So he drove to their cap, the enemy's cap rather, just at the point where the RT reached their own cap, and because it would have been a draw, because they basically both started capping at more or less the same time, he has turned right around and gone all the way back. And it's a little bit risky time-wise, but this thing is just quick enough. takes the hit for 0 damage from the GW. I don't know where that went, but anyway. And although it probably would have been survivable, it's still, you know, that was a heck of a lucky thing. He's able to then get that final kill, HE, in fact Hesh, it'll be, into the superstructure. Just finishing it off, fine style, and putting over 8,000 damage done and winning the game. So, an ace tanker, Kolobanov's, Radley-Walters, steel wall, high caliber, of course the top gun, and he got a defender medal as well. That's not a bad performance. Now, this thing, I mean, you know, it's a tank destroyer. You can just drive around it. The Traverse, of course, is better than the Torty. It is reliant to some extent on teammates in terms of having your flanks protected, but there are certain points on certain maps where this thing is going to be just OP. And arguably this might be one of those maps. Just if you know that you've got a flank secure, there are going to be positions you can get yourself into where nobody can hurt you, other than maybe artillery. And even then, if you're picking your spots carefully, maybe artillery can't get you. So that was a bit of a ridiculous game. He wasn't the only one that was doing some damage in that one, but I mean the 8.3k and the 9 kills just far outstripped the rest of his team. Of the enemy team, it was unsurprisingly the 907 that had the highest amount of damage, although the Type 5 Heavy for some reason placed top of their scoreboard in terms of the XP gotten. But yeah, overall, I thought that was a fairly entertaining game for a rather defensive, high DPM tank destroyer match. They're not always that entertaining to watch, but this one was just, I don't know, it just showed off the positive qualities of the Badger pretty damn well, and shows that it can be a rather formidable opponent to deal with if it's played correctly. So that's it for this replay. Hopefully you have enjoyed it, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.